When the notorious Shadow Riders tried to force heavily pregnant Isabella Thorne off her ancestral estate, they thought they were dealing with a vulnerable woman alone on her farm. What these ruthless outlaws didn't know was that she was a former international fencing champion with over 200 competitive victories and a mastery of historical European martial arts spanning generations. Their attempt at intimidation would expose one of the largest criminal enterprises in the Shenandoah Valley, leading to an extraordinary showdown that would change a small town forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the ancient oaks that lined the approach to Thornhaven Estate, their branches casting long shadows across the dew-kissed fields, where Isabella Thorne's family had cultivated heritage wheat for 6 generations. Her hand rested protectively over her growing child as she surveyed the land from her wraparound porch, the morning light catching the elegant hilt of her grandfather's rapier mounted beside the door. Not as decoration, but as a testament to her family's unique heritage. Shenandoah Valley had always been a peaceful place, where farming families could trace their histories back to colonial times, where traditional arts were preserved alongside modern innovation, and where people still believed in the power of community. But something had changed in recent months. New faces had appeared in town, bringing with them an undercurrent of menace that Isabella recognized all too well from her years competing in international circles, the look of predators sizing up prey. The rumble of motorcycles broke the morning stillness. 3 black SUVs and several bikes approached along the gravel drive, their pristine finish incongruous against the pastoral backdrop. Isabella set down her morning tea with deliberate calm, years of competition experience steadying her nerves despite her condition. As the vehicles fanned out in a practiced formation, she noted their positioning with the tactical awareness that had made her a champion. James "Shadow" Blackwood emerged from the lead vehicle, his tailored leather jacket and silver rings marking him as someone who preferred intimidation to honest work. 2 men flanked him, their movements betraying professional training that went beyond typical outlaw muscle. Isabella's trained eye caught the telltale bulges of concealed weapons. "Mrs. Thorne!" Blackwood called out, his voice carrying false warmth. "Beautiful morning for a business discussion." Isabella's voice remained steady, her competition poised, serving her well. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe my attorney made our position clear last week. Thornhaven isn't for sale." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes as he approached the porch. "Steps. The property values in this area are skyrocketing, Mrs. Thorne. Our offer is more than generous, and in your—" His eyes flickered to her pregnant form. Current condition, managing an estate this size must be challenging. "I've faced bigger challenges on the competition circuit, Mr. Blackwood," Isabella replied, her blue eyes meeting his without flinching. "My family built this estate from nothing. My child will be the 7th generation to learn our arts in these halls. Some things are worth more than money." A shadow crossed Blackwood's face, his practiced charm slipping for just a moment. "Mrs. Thorne, I don't think you understand the opportunity we're offering. Times are changing. The valley is changing. You don't want to be left behind." The threat in his words hung in the morning air. Behind him, his men had spread out, their casual observation of the estate buildings anything but casual to Isabella's experienced eye. "I understand perfectly," Isabella replied, her voice cooling to the temperature she'd used before championship matches. "I understand that legitimate businessmen don't need a dozen armed men to make a real estate offer. I understand that your kind of change isn't what this valley needs." Blackwood stepped closer, 1 foot on the bottom porch step. "Your kind of stubborn pride can be dangerous, Mrs. Thorne, Accidents happen on farms all the time, especially to women in your condition, living alone. Isabella didn't back away. Instead, she smiled slightly, the expression she'd worn before delivering a winning strike. "You know what else I understand, Mr. Blackwood? I understand that you and your shadow riders think you can bully a pregnant woman off her land, but you've made two serious mistakes." "Is that right?" Blackwood's amusement carried an edge of menace. "And what mistakes would those be?" "First," Isabella said calmly, "you assumed I was alone." She nodded toward her front window, where morning sun glinted off the polished steel of mounted blades, not decorative pieces, but competition-grade weapons arranged with purpose. "I may be expecting, but I'm far from helpless." Blackwood's men tensed, hands moving instinctively toward concealed weapons. "And the second mistake?" Blackwood asked, his voice hardening. The European Martial Arts Training Center at the nearby university campus had closed early for the evening, but lights still burned in Professor Ana Rodriguez's office. Her weathered hands paused over grading papers as her phone lit up with Isabella's name. Before she could even speak, she recognized the tension in her former student's voice. "Master Ana, remember when you said to call if I ever felt truly threatened, if things went beyond normal competition pressure?" Isabella's voice was controlled, carrying the same focus she'd shown before championship matches. There was a moment of silence on the line. When Ana responded, her voice had shifted from professorial warmth to the hard edge of someone who'd trained champions for 4 decades. "What happened?" "The Shadow Riders were just here. Their leader, James Blackwood, made it quite clear they won't take no for an answer." Isabella watched a red-tailed hawk circle overhead, its cry piercing the morning quiet. "I think it's time we showed them what happens when they threaten the wrong family." The Historical Combat Research Institute's conference room fell silent. As Ana Rodriguez lowered her phone, her expression had shifted from casual attention to focused intensity in the space of a single conversation. Michael Chen, her longtime research partner and fellow instructor, recognized that look. It was the same one Ana wore before preparing students for high-stakes international competitions. "Emergency situation." Ana's voice carried the quiet authority that had guided numerous students to championship titles. "Isabella needs us." The pregnant former champion, Shadow Riders. Michael's expression darkened. "The motorcycle gang that's been moving up from Georgia thought they were just running protection rackets and illegal fights. Time to find out." Ana moved with purpose toward their equipment room, her mind already calculating. "Call Sarah at the Chronicle. She's been tracking gang activity in the region." While Michael made the call, Ana pulled up satellite imagery of the Shenandoah Valley on her laptop. The region had changed subtly in recent months. New businesses appearing on the outskirts, development pushing into what used to be pristine farmland. The Shadow Riders' compound sat just outside county limits, a sprawling complex of buildings too well maintained for a simple motorcycle club. "Sarah's got intel," Michael reported, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "Says the Shadow Riders have been buying up property all along the valley, strong-arming locals, but keeping it just legal enough to avoid serious attention. But there's more. They're not just targeting any properties. They're specifically going after historical estates with large land holdings." Ina's jaw tightened as she studied the satellite images more closely. Isabella's estate backs up against the Appalachian Trail. High ground, clear sightlines to 3 major highways. "Perfect spot for monitoring traffic," Michael's voice carried grim understanding, "or coordinating something bigger." The phone on Ana's desk rang, a secure line used only for competition circuit contacts. Michael answered, his expression growing more serious with each moment. "That was my contact at the state police. Shadow Riders have been on their radar for months. They're suspected of running underground fighting rings, using them for illegal betting and money laundering, but nothing solid enough for an indictment. Anna closed her laptop with decisive finality. Then we'll have to get them something solid. The drive to Thornhaven Estate took just under 2 hours. They switched drivers once, using the time to make calls and build a clearer picture. The Shadow Riders had evolved from a standard outlaw motorcycle club into something more sophisticated under James Blackwood's leadership. They'd maintained their outlaw biker image while developing legitimate business fronts, buying properties and establishing political connections. Near sunset, they passed the "Welcome to Cedar Grove" sign, the small town that served as gateway to this section of the valley. The town seemed unchanged at first glance. Same historic storefronts, same mountain backdrop, but Anna's trained eye caught the subtle differences. New security cameras on street corners, unfamiliar faces watching from doorways, local businesses closing earlier than she remembered. Marie's diner still anchored the main street corner. Through the windows, Anna could see the usual evening crowd. Farmers, shop owners, the regulars who'd been fixtures of town life for decades. But there was tension in their postures, conversations held in lower voices. "The estate first?" Michael asked as they approached the town limits. Anna shook her head. "Sheriff's office. Linda Hayes needs to know we're here. We do this right by the book, for now." The sheriff's department occupied the same brick building it had for generations. Sheriff Hayes stood as they entered, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "Anna Rodriguez, about time someone like you showed up. How bad is it?" "Worse than Isabella's letting on," Anna replied. "The Shadow Riders. What can you tell me?" The sheriff's weathered face tightened. "Started small, protection money from businesses, controlling the local fight clubs. But they're getting bolder. 2 barn fires in the last month, no proof of course. And the county commission." "Raymond Fletcher?" Anna asked, though she suspected the answer. Linda's disgust was evident. "He blocks every attempt at serious investigation. Claims we're harassing legitimate businessmen." Michael studied the incident map on the wall. "You've got the pattern marked." Linda nodded. "Started right after Blackwood bought the old Thompson property. Been expanding ever since. Isabella's estate is the last piece they need to control the whole Northern Valley corridor." "Then they're not getting it." Anna's voice carried absolute certainty. "But we need to be smart about this. These aren't your usual troublemakers." Linda's voice stopped them as they turned to leave. "Blackwood's people are professionals. Some have real combat training. They're building something big here." "I know." Anna met her gaze steadily. "That's why we're going to tear it down piece by piece. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sun had set by the time Anna and Michael pulled up to Thornhaven Estate. Lights burned in the training hall and the porch lights snapped on as they approached. Isabella Thorne stepped out, her posture maintaining the perfect balance she'd developed through years of competition, despite being 7 months pregnant. "You made good time," she said simply, as if Anna had just been away for a weekend instead of 2 years. Anna hugged her former student carefully, noting how, despite her condition, Isabella's arms still carried the toned strength of a dedicated martial artist. "Brought some help," Anna gestured. "This is Michael Chen, my research partner, expert in historical Asian combat arts." Isabella nodded to Michael, then looked at her former mentor with eyes that had seen too much trouble lately. "They'll be watching." "Good." Anna's smile was slight but dangerous. "Let them watch. Let them see exactly who they're dealing with." From the darkness beyond the estate's lights, unseen observers indeed watched the reunion. In the Shadow Riders' compound, James Blackwood received the report of Anna Rodriguez's arrival with carefully controlled anger. "So the pregnant champion called her old teacher." He crushed out his cigarette with unnecessary force. "Fine. If that's how she wants to play it, we'll show them both what happens when you stand in our way." But as Blackwood began planning, His response: he didn't notice the subtle changes already beginning in Cedar Grove. Word of Ana Rodriguez's return spread through the town's whispered conversations. In the historical fencing club that had nearly shut down under Shadow Rider pressure, old weapons were being maintained. At Marie's diner, locals who'd lived too long in fear began sharing stories of their own martial arts backgrounds. Inside Thornhaven's training hall, Anna examined the wall of historical weapons with appreciation. Each piece told a story: competition victories, family traditions, generations of martial knowledge preserved and passed down. They've been watching. The estate, Isabella explained, leading them to a table covered with notes and photographs. Taking pictures, noting visitors, but they made a mistake last week. She pulled out a phone, showing them a video. One of their photographers got too close. The video showed a brief encounter, a Shadow Rider member attempting to intimidate Isabella, clearly not expecting her to move, with competition-trained speed despite her pregnancy. The encounter ended with the man face down on the gravel, disarmed, with a technique that spoke of years of practical application. That's when the real pressure started, Isabella continued. Suddenly, it wasn't just offers to buy. They're trying to force me out before the baby comes. Michael examined the estate's security setup while they talked. They're professionals, but they're not used to dealing with people who can fight back. Most of their targets probably gave in early. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Matthews from the Chronicle entered, carrying files. "You need to see this," she said without preamble, spreading documents across the table. Property records, business registrations, shell companies. The Shadow Riders aren't just buying land, they're building an infrastructure. Anna studied the papers with the same focus she'd once used to analyze competition footage. They're creating a network. Each property they've acquired sits at a strategic point: roads, communications, sightlines. But look at these financial records, Sarah pointed to specific transactions. The money's not coming from illegal fights or protection rackets. Those are just cover. There's something bigger moving through their accounts. Isabella's hand rested on her family sword, mounted on the wall. "My great-grandfather built this estate to preserve our martial arts tradition. Said some knowledge was too valuable to lose. I always thought he meant the techniques, the training methods, but what if?" She moved to an old cabinet, pulling out leather-bound journals. He kept detailed records, not just of techniques, but of everything that happened in the valley. Look at this. In 1923, another group tried to take control of the region. They used legitimate businesses as fronts, just like the Shadow Riders. Sarah's journalistic instincts sparked. The Thompson property Blackwood bought first. That estate goes back to colonial times. What if these aren't just random acquisitions? What if they're following some kind of historical pattern? The door chimed again. Linda Hayes entered, bringing more troubling news. "Just got word from state police. Shadow Riders have started running security for local martial arts tournaments. Any school that won't use their services has accidents." They're not just taking over property, Michael realized. They're trying to control all organized combat sports in the region, building a monopoly on legitimate fighting while running their illegal operations behind it. Anna's expression hardened as the pattern emerged. Classic technique: control the legitimate face of something to hide what's happening beneath. But they didn't count on finding real martial artists who understand tradition, honor, and the true meaning of fighting arts. Isabella moved to the window, watching the moon rise over her family's land. "My grandfather used to say that real martial arts aren't about fighting. They're about standing up for what's right, protecting what matters, preserving what's valuable for future generations." Her hand rested on her unborn child. "I always thought I was training for competitions. Maybe I was training for this." A sudden movement caught their attention. Lights appeared on the estate's perimeter, shadow rider vehicles taking up observation positions. But this time, they weren't watching a vulnerable target. They were being watched in return by people who understood both ancient arts and modern resistance. "They think they can win through intimidation," Anna observed, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had guided champions. "They don't understand that true strength comes from something deeper than fear." The gathering in Thornhaven's training hall marked a turning point. Each person there represented different aspects of resistance: traditional martial arts, modern journalism, law enforcement, historical research. Together, they began forming a plan that would use both ancient wisdom and modern methods to confront the Shadow Riders' corruption. As they worked, the first signs of community awakening continued, spreading through Cedar Grove. In homes and dojos across the valley, people who had nearly forgotten their own strength began to remember. A resistance was forming, built on foundations, laid by generations of martial artists who understood that some things were worth fighting for. The European Martial Arts Center's early morning training session had already begun when James Blackwood made his first major move. City inspectors arrived at the historic building, armed with clipboards and suspicious findings. Structural concerns, they claimed, posting violation notices. Safety hazards requiring immediate closure. Ana Rodriguez watched from her office. As students were forced to leave mid-session, their faces showing confusion, turning to anger. She'd anticipated this. The Shadow Riders had used similar tactics against other martial arts schools in the region. But this time, the response would be different. "Everything's ready?" she asked Michael, who was coordinating with students via their secure group chat. "Phase 1 in place," he confirmed. "They think they're shutting us down. They don't realize they're helping us set up our counter-move." Within hours, videos began appearing on local social media. Students practicing in parks, parking lots, and backyards. Each clip showed determination rather than defeat, with captions sharing the European Martial Arts Center's history and importance to the community. The hashtag #WeTrainAnywhere started trending locally. Sarah Matthews' article in the Chronicle provided context. Local martial arts school faces suspicious closure. The piece didn't directly accuse the Shadow Riders, but it laid out a pattern of similar incidents across the valley, letting readers draw their own conclusions. At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella hosted impromptu classes in her training hall. Students who'd been displaced from the center found themselves training in a space steeped in martial arts history. "My family has preserved these arts through harder times than this," she told them, demonstrating techniques despite her pregnancy. "Sometimes pressure doesn't break you. It reveals what you're truly capable of." The Shadow Riders' response came swiftly. Tax liens appeared on Thornhaven's property. Building inspectors arrived at Sarah's newspaper office. Linda Hayes faced sudden budget cuts for the sheriff's department, but each attack revealed more of their methods, provided more evidence of corruption. "They're getting sloppy," Michael observed, documenting each incident. "Pushing too hard, too fast. They're not used to people pushing back." The community's resistance took unexpected forms. When Shadow Riders began parking outside the makeshift training locations, local food trucks would coincidentally set up nearby, their presence bringing crowds that made surveillance difficult. When gang members attempted to intimidate students, they'd find themselves surrounded by phone cameras, every interaction recorded. Marie's Diner became an unofficial headquarters for the growing resistance. Marie herself, a former kickboxing champion, offered her backroom for youth classes. "My grandfather taught boxing here during the Depression," she explained. "Said sometimes you have to hit back at hard times." The turning point came when the Shadow Riders attempted to shut down a children's tournament. They arrived with their usual intimidation tactics, only to find themselves facing something unexpected. Parents, many with their own martial arts backgrounds, formed a calm but unmovable line protecting the young competitors. James Blackwood arrived personally to handle the situation. He found Isabella Thorne waiting, surrounded by supporters from various local dojos. "This ends now," he declared, his practice charm cracking. "You're interfering with legitimate business operations." "Legitimate?" Isabella's voice carried across the suddenly quiet gymnasium. "Like the building inspectors you bribed, the tax assessors you threatened, the tournaments you've tried to control." "Careful, Mrs. Thorne." Blackwood stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Pregnancy can be delicate. Accidents happen." The tension in the room shifted palpably. Parents moved to protect their children, but not in fear, in disciplined formation, the way they'd been trained. "You still don't understand what you're facing," Isabella replied calmly. "Look around, Mr. Blackwood. Every person here has spent years learning to stand their ground, to protect what matters. You thought you could control martial arts in this valley. You don't even know what martial arts truly means." "Is that right?" Blackwood's amusement carried an edge of menace. "And what does it mean, Mrs. Thorne? It means we don't just train to fight." Her voice carried the quiet confidence of a champion. "We train to build something bigger than ourselves. Every person here is part of a tradition that goes back generations. We don't break under pressure. We grow stronger." As if to emphasize her point, the children's tournament resumed behind her. Young competitors demonstrated their skills, their discipline a stark contrast to the Shadow Riders' attempts at intimidation. "This is your final warning," Blackwood snarled, but his usual intimidating effect was diminished by the calm readiness surrounding him. "No," Isabella corrected, one hand resting protectively over her child, the other maintaining perfect competitive stance. "This is yours. Leave these kids alone. Leave our dojos alone. Leave our community alone. Because if you don't, you're going to learn what happens when you threaten people who've spent their whole lives learning to stand up against bullies." The Shadow Riders withdrew, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. That night, at an emergency meeting in Thornhaven's training hall, the various martial arts schools of the valley came together. Traditional rivals put aside their differences, recognizing a common threat. "They'll hit back harder," Anna warned the gathered instructors. "But they've shown us something important. They're afraid of unity, afraid of people standing together." Linda Hayes shared police intelligence. "They're planning something big. My sources say Blackwood's calling in reinforcements. Professional fighters, people with real combat experience." "Good." Isabella's response surprised some. "Let them bring in professionals. Let them show everyone what they really are. Because while they've been relying on fear and intimidation, we've been building something they can't break, a community that remembers its strength." The meeting marked a new phase in the resistance. Each school, each tradition, each style had something to contribute. Ancient arts and modern methods would combine to protect something precious, not just property or businesses, but the very spirit of martial arts itself. As the instructors left, carrying plans and assignments, the moon rose over Thornhaven Estate. In the distance, Shadow Rider vehicles maintained their surveillance. But now they weren't watching targets. They were watching warriors who had remembered their purpose. Sarah Matthews pulled another all-nighter at the Chronicle, cross-referencing property records with historical documents from Isabella's family archives. Her office walls had become a web of connections. Photographs, maps, and documents spanning decades. A pattern was emerging, but its full significance remained elusive. Her phone buzzed. Ana Rodriguez calling. "You need to see this," Sarah said without preamble. "The Shadow Riders aren't just following a random acquisition pattern. They're recreating something that happened here before." At Thornhaven's training hall, Sarah spread her findings across the antique teaching platform, where generations of martial artists had demonstrated their skills. Look at these property records from 1923, she pointed to yellowed documents. Another group tried to take control of the valley's strategic points. They used legitimate businesses as fronts, just like the Shadow Riders. Isabella studied the old maps with growing concern. The same properties, they're targeting the exact same locations. But why these specific places? Michael asked, comparing modern satellite images with historical surveys. Linda Hayes arrived, bringing more pieces to the puzzle. Just got information from state police. Shadow Riders have been buying properties along 3 major routes across state lines, all through shell companies, all traced back to offshore accounts. Anna's eyes narrowed as she overlaid the historical and modern maps. They're not just copying an old pattern. They're rebuilding something that was stopped before it could be completed. Sarah pulled out more documents. In 1923, it was a group called the Iron Circle. They claimed to be promoting legitimate combat sports, traditional martial arts, but they were using the schools as cover for something bigger. What stopped them? Michael asked, examining the historical records. Isabella moved to her family's display of ancestral weapons. My great-grandfather. He organized the valley's martial arts schools to resist them. But these journals, there are pages missing, like someone didn't want the full story preserved. Linda's radio crackled, reports of Shadow Rider reinforcements arriving. Professional fighters with serious backgrounds moving into the compound on the old Thompson property. They're building something big, she warned. These aren't just local thugs anymore. Sarah's investigation had revealed more. Look at these financial patterns, the money flowing through their legitimate businesses. It's too much for fight promotions and protection rackets. They're moving something else through the valley. Anna studied the documents with growing understanding. The historical martial arts network. The old families who maintained fighting traditions. They weren't just preserving techniques, they were guarding something. Knowledge, maybe, or roots. Ways through the mountains that don't appear on modern maps. Michael's research contacts provided another crucial piece. Just heard from my source in federal law enforcement. Shadow Riders have been connected to international fight trafficking. They find skilled fighters in underground circuits, move them across borders using their legitimate sports promotions as cover. But that's not all they're moving, Sarah added, pulling up more financial records. The money trail suggests something bigger. These shell companies, these property acquisitions, they're creating infrastructure for something larger than human trafficking. Isabella opened another of her great-grandfather's journals. Listen to this entry. The Iron Circle claims to promote the fighting arts, but they seek to corrupt their true purpose. These arts were preserved not just for combat, but to protect something greater. Each stance, each technique contains hidden knowledge. The roots we guard, the secrets we maintain, they must never fall into the wrong hands. The implications settled over the room. The Shadow Riders weren't just trying to control local martial arts or run criminal enterprises. They were hunting something older, something hidden in the valley's history of traditional combat arts. That's why they need these specific properties, Inna realized. These aren't just strategic locations for modern trafficking. They're trying to uncover something that was deliberately hidden by the traditional martial arts community. Linda's expression hardened, and they're willing to use whatever force necessary to get it. My sources say they're bringing in more than just professional fighters, former military, combat specialists. Good, Isabella's voice carried quiet. Conviction, let them bring their modern warriors. We have something stronger, a legacy of martial arts that's protected this valley for generations. Not just techniques for fighting, but principles worth defending. Sarah gathered her evidence. I can expose their current operations, their financial crimes, but this older connection, this historical pattern, It suggests something bigger, at stake. The group worked late into the night, piecing together the dual threats they faced. The Shadow Riders' immediate criminal operations needed to be stopped, but the deeper mystery of what they were truly seeking required understanding generations of martial arts history. As midnight approached, Isabella stood at her window, watching Shadow Rider vehicles move through the valley. Her hand rested on her unborn child, feeling the movement that reminded her what she was fighting for. "They think martial arts is about fighting," she told Anna. "They don't understand it's about protecting knowledge, protecting traditions, protecting future generations. My great-grandfather knew this. Now it's our turn to prove worthy of that legacy." The night's discoveries had changed the nature of their resistance. They weren't just fighting modern criminals. They were continuing a generations-long mission to protect something vital. The Shadow Riders had unknowingly started a war, not just with current martial artists, but with a tradition that had preserved its secrets through centuries of challenges. The Shadow Riders' professional reinforcements arrived with cold efficiency. Black SUVs with tinted windows began appearing in Cedar Grove, their occupants moving with military precision. These weren't typical outlaws. Their bearing and vigilance spoke of serious combat experience. Michael Chen spotted them first during his morning surveillance route. "Former Special Forces," he told Anna, sharing discreet photos taken from Marie's diner. "Private military contractors, Blackwood's bringing in serious muscle." Anna studied the images while coordinating with their growing network of allies. 4 distinct teams had been identified, each positioning themselves at strategic points throughout the valley. Their presence marked a significant escalation. These men weren't just hired muscle, they were trained killers. Sarah Matthews slipped into their booth at Marie's, her voice low. "Got something." Police scanner caught chatter about shipments coming through the old mountain trails. Sheriff's deputies under Blackwood's control have been redirecting patrols away from those areas. The diner's regular customers were leaving larger tips than usual. Silent support for Marie's willingness to let their group use the place as an observation post. Small acts of resistance were spreading through town. The local martial arts supply store had refused to sell equipment to Shadow Rider affiliates. The community center had started offering free self-defense classes. The bell above the diners, and door chimed. James Blackwood himself entered, flanked by 2 of his new professionals. The morning crowd fell silent as he slid into Anna's booth uninvited, his expensive leather jacket out of place in the homey diner. "Rodriguez." His smile was cold. "We should talk." "Nothing to talk about." Anna's voice remained neutral, but her posture shifted slightly, ready for anything. "Actually, there is." Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. "See, you're interfering with business, legitimate business, making my investors nervous." "Legitimate?" Anna's eyebrow raised. "That why you need military contractors to protect your investment?" Blackwood's facade cracked slightly. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is bigger than your students' stubborn pride, bigger than your little martial arts community." "That's where you're wrong." Anna met his gaze steadily. "This community isn't little. It's just been waiting for someone to remind them of their strength." "Careful, Rodriguez." Blackwood's voice dropped dangerously. "Heroes have a way of getting hurt. Sometimes they're students too." Michael chose that moment to approach, casual but purposeful. Blackwood's professionals tensed, hands moving beneath their jackets. "Everything okay here, Anna?" Before Blackwood could respond, Sheriff Hayes entered the diner. Her expression hardened at seeing Blackwood, but her voice remained professional. "Mr. Blackwood, just the man I wanted to see. We've got some irregularities in your event permits to discuss." Blackwood stood smoothly. "Another time, Sheriff. I was just leaving." He turned back to Anna. "Think about what I said. Some traditions aren't worth dying for." After they left, Linda joined their booth. 4 of my deputies are on their payroll. Just got proof. Bank records show regular payments through shell companies. Can you arrest them? Sarah asked. Linda shook her head. Not without exposing our investigation. Besides, Commissioner Fletcher would have them released within hours. They're setting up surveillance on Thornhaven. Michael nodded toward the window. Professional teams, rotating shifts. Good. Anna's smile was grim. While they're watching us, they won't notice what we're really doing. At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella had visitors of a different kind. Local martial arts instructors arrived under the pretense of private lessons, each bringing intelligence about Shadow Rider movements. Marie brought food and news about which officials were in Blackwood's pocket. The historic weapons shop owner came to appraise her collection, leaving behind sophisticated security equipment. The Shadow Riders photographed every visitor, logged every interaction, but they missed the subtle exchanges, the quiet conversations, building a network of resistance. In the sheriff's office, Linda met secretly with Anna and Michael after hours. Got something interesting from state police. She spread a map across her desk. Shadow Riders have been buying properties along 3 major transport routes, all through shell companies, all traced back to offshore accounts. Fight trafficking. Corridors, Michael confirmed. They're setting up a distribution network. Thornhaven would give them a clear route straight through to the next state. And surveillance positions overlooking every major approach, Anna added. They're building something big. Sarah arrived through the back door, carrying files. Found records of similar operations in Tennessee and Kentucky. Same pattern. They move in, buy key properties, corrupt local officials. Within 6 months, underground fight trafficking in the area triples. But they made a mistake here, Anna said quietly. They thought they could intimidate a pregnant woman off her land. Instead, they've given us the opening we need to bring down their whole operation. A crackle of static from Linda's radio interrupted them. Multiple vehicles approaching Thornhaven Estate. Armed subjects observed. Anna was already moving. They're making their play sooner than expected. Be careful, Linda warned. These professionals won't hesitate to use lethal force. Neither will we. Anna's voice was cold. They wanted to test our martial arts tradition. Let's show them what real warriors can do. As Michael monitored radio traffic, the Shadow Riders, elite teams were mobilizing in force around Thornhaven Estate. Their professionals took up tactical positions, their movements betraying years of military experience. But what they didn't know was that Anna and Isabella had spent the last week preparing for exactly this scenario. The historic estate was no longer just a training hall. It was a carefully prepared ground, and the Shadow Riders were about to learn why generations of martial artists had chosen this specific location to preserve their arts. Night had fallen over Thornhaven when the Shadow Riders made their move. 6 vehicles approached with lights off, using the rolling terrain for cover. Their contractors deployed with professional precision, establishing a perimeter around the property. From their perspective, it looked like a straightforward intimidation operation. They were wrong. Inside the training hall, Isabella moved with practiced calm, her pregnancy not hindering the fluid grace developed through years of competition. Through her earpiece, she could hear Anna's quiet voice coordinating their response. Just like we discussed, Anna advised, let them think they have the advantage. The first sign that something was wrong came when the contractor's radio communications suddenly filled with static. Michael had spent days setting up interference equipment, hidden in the antique training equipment around the property. Communications compromised, one of the professionals reported, switching to hand signals. They maintained their approach, but with noticeably more caution. The second surprise came from the town. Vehicles began arriving, Marie's delivery van, the martial arts supply store's truck. a half-dozen local cars driven by people who'd finally had enough of living in fear. They parked along the access road, blocking the Shadow Riders' escape route. "What the hell is this?" Steve Marshall, Blackwood's security chief, demanded while watching through night vision equipment. The contractor's neat, tactical formation was suddenly compromised, forced to split their attention. Anna's voice came clearly over their interrupted radio frequencies. "This is private property. You have 10 seconds to withdraw." James Blackwood's voice crackled with rage as he grabbed a radio. "Rodriguez, you're making a big mistake. Clear these vehicles or we'll clear them ourselves." "Last warning," Anna replied calmly. "Leave now." 2 contractors advanced on the training hall's main gate. The moment they touched it, lights blazed to life. Powerful flood lamps mounted on the historic building's roof turned night into day. The professionals found themselves illuminated, their positions exposed. "Sniper teams, you have targets?" Marshall demanded. Silence answered him. His sniper teams, positioned in the hills overlooking the estate, had found their scopes mysteriously painted over. The work of local hunters who knew every trail and approach to the property. Sheriff Hayes's voice cut through the chaos. "This is the police. I'm receiving reports of armed individuals threatening civilians. All units respond." Marshall recognized the trap too late. If his men engaged now, they'd be doing it in front of witnesses, with police en route. Their carefully maintained facade of legitimate security work would crumble. "Pull back!" he ordered through gritted teeth. "Tactical withdrawal now!" The contractors began retreating, their professional demeanor cracking as locals used phones to film their every move. Sarah Matthews was there too, documenting everything. But the Shadow Riders had one last card to play. As the main force withdrew, 2 men broke from the group, rushing toward the training hall with incendiary devices. They never made it. Michael emerged from the shadows, his movements displaying years of martial arts mastery. One precise strike disarmed the first man. The second found himself facing Isabella, who seemed to materialize from the darkness. Despite her pregnancy, her competition-trained reflexes remained razor-sharp. The fight was brief, controlled, and decisive. Both attackers were subdued without a single blow thrown, their own momentum used against them. They were zip-tied and left for the approaching police. When the police arrived, they found a curious scene: professional contractors in retreat, their tactical operation disrupted by simple preparation and community action, 2 would-be arsonists in custody, and dozens of witnesses with video evidence of the entire attempt. Marshall watched their plans unravel from the command vehicle, fury building. "This isn't over, Rodriguez," he shouted into the radio. "Actually, it is," Anna replied. "You just gave us probable cause to investigate every vehicle and individual involved in tonight's attempt." Sheriff Hayes' voice held satisfaction. "Already got the warrants. Judge Thompson was happy to sign them after seeing the evidence of attempted assault and arson." The search of the Shadow Riders' vehicles revealed more than they'd intended. Police found military-grade communications equipment, detailed maps of underground fight club locations, and most damaging of all, documentation of human trafficking routes through the county. In the training hall, Isabella finally relaxed her stance, one hand protectively over her child. Well, that was exciting. Anna entered, checking her student over despite knowing she'd been perfectly safe. "You okay?" "Of course." Isabella smiled slightly, though her voice betrayed fatigue, "though I suspect we've just stirred up a hornet's nest." That was the plan. Anna watched through the window as police processed the scene. They had to show their hand eventually. Now we have proof of their real operations. Michael joined them, his expression serious. "Found something in their vehicles. Documentation linking them to fighting rings in 3 states. Blackwood's operation is bigger than we thought." "Good." Anna's voice was grim. "The bigger they are, the harder they fall." At the Shadow Riders' compound, James Blackwood was discovering just how badly the night's operation had gone wrong. His phone rang, a secure line used only for emergencies. "You assured us the situation was under control." His superior's voice was cold. "Now we have police searching vehicles containing sensitive information. This is unacceptable." "I'll handle it," Blackwood promised, sweat beading on his forehead. "You'd better. You have 24 hours to clean this up. After that, we'll send someone to handle it our way." At the Shadow Riders' compound, Blackwood's carefully constructed plans were crumbling around him. He'd underestimated the resistance, underestimated the community's willingness to fight back. But he still had options, dangerous ones. "Call our friends in state government," he ordered Marshall. "Tell them to shut down Hayes's investigation." He paced the room, anger building. "Then get me everything you can find on Rodriguez's. Competition history, her students, her training methods, everything." "Sir," Marshall hesitated, "those records are protected. The International Martial Arts Federation—" "Not to everyone." Blackwood's smile was vicious. Time to show Rodriguez what real warfare looks like. But even as he plotted his counterattack, Blackwood failed to notice how the night's events had changed things in Cedar Grove. People who'd lived in fear were standing taller. Those who'd stayed silent were finding their voices. Sarah Matthews worked through the night at the Chronicle, piecing together a complex web of connections. "Look at this pattern," she told Anna over a secure line. "Every property they've acquired connects to underground fighting circuits, but not just modern ones, historical ones, dating back generations." Anna studied the data on her laptop, seeing patterns emerge. They're not just creating new routes, they're rediscovering old ones, routes that the traditional martial arts community used to use for something else. Michael arrived with more intelligence. "My contacts in the international competition circuit came through. Shadow Riders have been infiltrating legitimate tournaments across 3 continents. They use them to scout talent for their underground fights." But that's not all they're looking for," Isabella added, joining them via video call from Thornhaven's secure system. "These old journals mention something else. The traditional arts weren't just about fighting, they were protecting something. Knowledge, routes, secrets that were too dangerous to write down." Blackwood's counterattack began at dawn. State police cruisers rolled into Cedar Grove, carrying investigators from the Attorney General's office. Their first stop was the sheriff's department, where they served Linda Hayes with orders to surrender all evidence from the previous night's incident. "This investigation has been reassigned to the state level," the lead investigator announced, producing paperwork signed by senior officials. "All materials are to be turned over immediately." Linda's response was polite but firm. "Interesting timing, especially since I already sent copies of everything to the FBI's organized crime unit." At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella received official visits from State Athletic Commission inspectors, safety regulators, and licensing boards, all arriving simultaneously, all finding sudden urgent reasons to examine her martial arts school's credentials. "Your teaching certifications seem to be out of date," one official declared, shuffling through papers, "and there are concerns about non-registered combat training. We may need to suspend all classes pending review." Isabella's voice could have frozen hell itself. "Is that so? Interesting that my certifications were perfectly valid last week when Mr. Blackwood wanted to buy the property." Across town, Anna and Michael monitored the situation from their makeshift command center in Marie's Diner's back room. Sarah Matthews arrived with fresh intelligence. "Blackwood's called in every political favor he has," she reported, spreading documents across the table. "But he's burning bridges doing it. Look at these financial transfers. He's paying out big money to keep people in line." Michael studied the papers. "He's getting desperate, making mistakes. There's more. 2 international fight promoters. Checked into the Valley View Hotel this morning. Traveling under business cover, but my contact at the front desk recognized their type. The diner's door opened, admitting a local martial arts instructor, her face showing barely controlled anger. They just suspended my school's license. Safety violations they've never found in 15 years of inspections. How many others? Anna asked, mentally mapping their network status. 6 so far, all people who helped last night. Marie set coffee cups in front of them with deliberate calm. They tried that here too, but seems their inspector got lost on the way, won't be able to make it until next week. The gleam in her eyes suggested the inspector might have received some very specific directions. The community was learning to fight back in its own ways. At the sheriff's department, Linda Hayes faced another crisis. Her deputies, loyal to Blackwood, had chosen this moment to file formal complaints against her, alleged misconduct and abuse of power. It's a coordinated effort to remove you, Paul Martinez, one of her few trusted deputies, reported. They're pushing for an emergency hearing with the county commission. Let them push, Linda replied. Meanwhile, get me everything you can. On Deputy Wilson's financial records, Sarah says he's been making interesting purchases lately. The afternoon brought more pressure. Tax liens appeared on properties owned by those who'd helped thwart the Shadow Riders. Building inspectors discovered urgent violations requiring immediate closure of resistant businesses. Blackwood's political machinery was working overtime, but resistance was growing. When inspectors tried to close the martial arts supply store, they found 30 students conducting an impromptu training session in the parking lot, their practice making access impossible. The local martial arts schools remained open despite suspension orders, supported by a constant stream of community members attending private social gatherings that just happened to include training. Sarah's investigation revealed another layer. Look at these shell companies, she showed Anna and Michael. The money's not just moving through fight promotions. They're building something bigger, a network that uses martial arts as cover for something else. I found something in the old journals, Isabella added via secure call, a reference to the true purpose of certain training methods. They weren't just teaching fighting techniques, they were preserving a kind of map. Movements that, when understood properly, describe routes and locations. That's what they're really after, Anna realized, not just the properties or the fight trafficking. They're trying to uncover something that the traditional martial arts community has been protecting for generations. The scope of their fight was expanding, revealing layers of history and purpose that went beyond simple criminal enterprise. But as the sun set over Cedar Grove, the community's resolve only strengthened. Each attempt at intimidation, each abuse of power, only served to remind people of what they were fighting for. Inside the Shadow Riders compound, James Blackwood met with the international fight promoters, their displeasure evident in their cold demeanor. The taller man, who called himself Mr. Chen, wasted no time on pleasantries. This attention is unacceptable, he stated, examining surveillance photos of the previous night's confrontation. Your operation was supposed to be invisible, and now we hear rumors about historical research, about old training records being examined. I can handle Rodriguez and her student, Blackwood insisted, wiping sweat from his brow. We've got leverage now. Look. He opened a folder containing competition records, tournament histories, old match footage, her techniques, her training methods. They're not just sport. She's one of them, one of the old schools that guard the secret routes. Chen cut him off with a sharp gesture. You don't understand. We're not just concerned about your local problems. If people start connecting historical martial arts to the old roots, everything we've built could unravel. Michael, Chen and Anna monitored the meeting from their hidden observation post near the compound, their surveillance equipment picking up every word. They're nervous, Michael noted. Really nervous about something in those old records. Listen to how they talk about the roots, Anna replied quietly, like they're more important than their current operations. There's something bigger here. Back at Thornhaven Estate, Isabella worked with Sarah, correlating old training manuals with modern maps. Look at this, she pointed to a series of Kata diagrams. These aren't just fighting techniques. When you overlay them on the valley's topography, they match old travel routes perfectly. Routes that could be used for their fight trafficking, Sarah suggested. No, Isabella's voice carried certainty. These are something else. My great-grandfather's notes mentioned the true treasure being moved along these paths. Something valuable enough that entire martial arts styles were developed just to hide its location. The Shadow Riders' response to this investigation was immediate and brutal. That night, 3 separate teams of professionals hit locations simultaneously. The Chronicle's office, the Sheriff's Department's evidence room, and Thornhaven's historical archives. But the community was ready. When the hit team arrived at the Chronicle, they found the building dark and empty. Sarah had already moved her investigation to a secure location. The evidence room yielded nothing but copies, all originals safely stored off-site. And at Thornhaven, they encountered something unexpected. Isabella stood in her training hall, 7 months pregnant, but moving with the fluid grace of a lifetime champion. Behind her, display cases that had held historical documents now contained only practice materials. "Looking for something?" she asked the intruders calmly, one hand resting protectively over her child, the other maintaining perfect defensive stance. The lead intruder raised his weapon. "The old records! Where are they?" "You still don't understand what you're dealing with," Isabella replied. "These arts weren't preserved through force. They were preserved through wisdom, through knowing what's worth protecting and how to protect it." As if on cue, lights blazed to life outside. The intruders found themselves surrounded, not by police or armed defenders, but by martial artists from every school in the valley, each moving through their forms in perfect unison. The message was clear. This community wasn't just protecting documents. They were living embodiments of the traditions themselves. The Shadow Riders team withdrew, but their failure triggered an even more aggressive response. Blackwood received new orders from his superiors. "Clean this up, whatever it takes." What followed was an escalation nobody had expected. Professional fighters began appearing at local tournaments, challenging schools' legitimacy through official channels. Legal challenges threatened the licenses of every martial arts instructor who stood against them. Financial pressure mounted on businesses that supported the resistance, but each attack met an innovative response. When they challenged schools' legitimacy, centuries of documented lineage emerged. When they applied financial pressure, the community created its own economy of mutual support. When they tried to divide people through fear, they found unity instead. "They still don't see it," Anna told the gathered resistance leaders at Marie's diner. "They think martial arts is about fighting. They've never understood it's about perseverance, about finding strength through adversity." Linda Hayes shared police intelligence. "They're moving something big through the old routes, something that has their international backers terrified of exposure." "Good," Isabella's voice came through the secure line. "Let them be afraid. They thought they could erase generations of tradition through force. Instead, they've awakened something they can't control, a community that remembers why these arts were preserved in the first place." Sarah's investigation had uncovered another layer. "The Shadow Riders aren't just a criminal organization," she explained, showing them new evidence. "They're part of something older, something that's been trying to uncover these secrets for generations. Each time they failed, because they never understood the true strength of martial arts communities." As night fell over Cedar Grove, the resistance took on a new form. In dojos and training halls across the valley, students weren't just practicing techniques. They were learning the deeper meanings hidden within their arts. Each movement contained a piece of the map. Each form preserved part of the secret their ancestors had deemed worth protecting. The Shadow Riders had wanted to control martial arts in the valley. Instead, they had sparked a renaissance, awakening not just fighting spirit, but the deeper wisdom that had always been martial arts' true strength. Deep in Thornhaven's archives, Isabella made a breakthrough. Hidden within an old training manual's binding, she discovered letters dating back to 1876, written by her great-great-grandmother, Victoria Thorne. "Master Anna," she called through their secure line, "you need to see this." Hours later, key members of the resistance gathered in Thornhaven's training hall. Isabella carefully laid out the yellowed pages, her hands steady despite her advancing pregnancy. "These aren't just training notes," she explained. "Listen, the true purpose of our arts extends beyond combat. Each school guards a piece of something greater. The forms we teach, the techniques we preserve, they're a map, a key to something the outside world must never control." Sarah Matthews studied the documents with journalistic precision. "Look at these dates. Major historical events in the valley coincide with changes in different schools' teaching methods. When mining companies tried to seize land in the 1880s, when bootleggers established routes during Prohibition. Each time, the martial arts community adapted, preserving something more than just fighting techniques." "But what were they protecting?" Michael asked, comparing the old letters with modern maps. Anna's eyes narrowed as she recognized patterns in the historical records. "Not what, who. These aren't just martial arts lineages, they're guardian lineages. Each school, each tradition was positioned to protect specific families, specific knowledge." Linda Hayes arrived with more historical context. "Just found records of an 1892 conflict. A group called the Iron Circle tried to force every martial arts school in the valley to register with them, claimed they were standardizing teaching methods." "The same pattern," Isabella noted. "Outside forces trying to control traditional martial arts, trying to unlock secrets they don't understand." Sarah's research revealed deeper connections. The Iron Circle didn't disappear. They evolved, became legitimate fight promoters, started controlling professional combat sports. The Shadow Riders aren't just copying their methods, they're their direct descendants. The historical revelations kept coming. Old photographs showed martial arts demonstrations that, when analyzed, properly mapped perfectly to hidden mountain passes. Training sequences passed down through generations contained coded information about safe houses and escape routes. "Our ancestors weren't just teaching fighting," Isabella realized, one hand resting on her unborn child. "They were preserving a network of protection, a way to keep people safe from those who would abuse power." At the Shadow Riders' compound, Blackwood received his own historical briefing from Mr. Chen. "The old families have been blocking our operations for generations. Every time we get close to the complete map, they find ways to preserve their secrets. But now we have technology they couldn't imagine," Blackwood finished. "Satellite, imaging, data analysis, professional fighters trained in multiple styles." "Don't underestimate tradition," Chen warned. "We've made that mistake before. These arts survived this long for a reason." The Resistance's investigation uncovered more layers of history. Each traditional school in the valley had specialized. Knowledge. One preserved routes through the mountains, another maintained safe houses, others kept lists of allied families who could be trusted. "It's brilliant," Michael observed. "By spreading the knowledge across different styles, different schools, they ensured no one group could ever control everything. You'd need the entire community working together to access the full network." The Shadow Riders launched a new offensive, targeting historical sites throughout the valley. But each attempt to uncover old records met prepared resistance. When they tried to excavate an old training ground, they found the local historical society had already declared it a protected site. When they attempted to pressure elderly instructors for information, they discovered the knowledge had already been passed to younger generations. They don't understand what they're really fighting, Anna told her gathered allies. They think if they can just find the right documents, decode the right training sequences, they'll unlock some grand secret. But the true power was never in hidden maps or coded messages. Isabella opened another of Victoria's letters. Listen to this. Our greatest strength isn't in what we hide, but in how we preserve it. Not through force or secrecy alone, but through community, through teaching each generation to recognize what's worth protecting. The historical connections became clearer. The Valley's martial arts schools hadn't survived by chance. They'd been strategically positioned, each preserving part of a larger tradition. The very techniques they taught contained encrypted knowledge, passed down through physical movement rather than written words. That's why they can't break us, Sarah realized. The Shadow Riders want to control martial arts to access these old roots and secrets, but the real secret is in the community itself, in how we train, how we teach, how we support each other. As night fell over Cedar Grove, the resistance took on new meaning. They weren't just fighting modern criminals. They were continuing a generations-long tradition of protecting something precious. The Shadow Riders had unknowingly challenged not just current martial artists, but a legacy that had preserved its secrets through centuries of similar threats. My great-great-grandmother wrote something else, Isabella told them, reading from the final letter. Remember always that our art's true strength isn't in the techniques we practice, but in the bonds we forge. Each student we teach, each tradition we preserve, adds another link in a chain that stretches back through time. As long as we maintain these connections, our legacy remains unbroken. The historical revelations transformed their resistance. Every technique they practiced, every form they taught, carried deeper meaning. They weren't just defending against modern threats. They were honoring a legacy of protection that had quietly shaped the Valley's history for generations. The breakthrough came at midnight. Sarah Matthews burst into Marie's diner's back room, where Anna and Michael were coordinating surveillance of Shadow Rider movements. "Found something," she announced, spreading documents across the table. "This goes way beyond fight trafficking." Ina studied the financial records with growing concern. These aren't just criminal transactions. These are government contracts, international security firms. The Shadow Riders aren't just a gang, Michael confirmed, examining routing, numbers and shell companies. They're a front for something bigger. Look at these connections: private military companies, defense contractors, intelligence agencies. Linda Hayes arrived with more pieces of the puzzle. Just got word from federal sources. Shadow Riders have similar operations in 12 countries. They use underground fighting rings to recruit not just for illegal matches, but for private military operations. "And the historical martial arts angle?" Anna asked, though she was beginning to see the pattern. Sarah pulled up more documents on her laptop. These old roots, the ones hidden in traditional forms, they're not just paths through mountains. They're part of a network that predates modern borders, perfect for moving people and materials without official oversight. At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella received an unexpected visitor. Through her security cameras, she watched an elderly man approach her front door alone. No Shadow Rider escort, no obvious weapons. When she opened the door, his bow was perfect, traditional. "Mrs. Thorne," he introduced himself with impeccable manners, "I am Master Chen Wei, formerly of the Singapore Combat Arts Association. We need to talk about what your family has been protecting." Inside her training hall, Chen Wei studied the ancestral weapons with genuine appreciation. Your great-grandfather's work, he noted, examining a particularly well-preserved sword. I recognize the style. You knew him? Isabella asked, maintaining safe distance despite the man's seemingly peaceful demeanor. No, but I knew of him, just as I know of you and your teacher Ana Rodriguez. You're part of something larger than you realize. At the Shadow Riders' compound, James Blackwood received urgent orders from his superiors. Prototype operations are being compromised worldwide, the secure message read. Accelerate acquisition of all target properties. Use whatever force necessary. But as Blackwood mobilized his forces, he didn't realize his own organization was fracturing. Professional fighters recruited for their underground matches began questioning their roles. Security contractors noticed discrepancies in their mission briefings. Back at Thornhaven, Chen Wei revealed more. The Shadow Riders aren't just seeking control of martial arts schools. They're trying to access a network that's existed for centuries, a system for protecting those who need to disappear from powerful enemies. The hidden roots, Isabella understood. They're not for smuggling, they're for rescue. Your great-grandfather and others like him, Chen Wei continued. They preserved these arts not just for fighting, but for saving lives. Political refugees, whistleblowers, people who knew too much about powerful organizations. The traditional martial arts community has been helping them escape for generations. Sarah's investigation confirmed this revelation. Look at these patterns, she showed Anna and Michael. Every time the Shadow Riders establish control in a region, people start disappearing. Not random people, specific targets. Activists, journalists, anyone who threatens certain corporate or government interests. They're not trying to preserve the old roots, Michael realized. They're trying to shut them down, close off escape paths that have existed for centuries. Linda brought more disturbing news. Just got word from international contacts. Similar martial arts communities under attack in 6 countries. Always the same pattern, legitimate fight promotions as cover, pressure on traditional schools, attempts to decode historical training methods. At the Shadow Riders' compound, Blackwood faced growing pressure. The network is compromised, his superiors warned. Too many people are starting to connect the dots. Shut it down. Eliminate everyone who knows the old ways. But the community's response to these revelations wasn't fear. It was renewed determination. Traditional schools shared knowledge more openly with each other, preserving their secrets through unity rather than isolation. My great-grandfather wrote about this, Isabella told them, reading from his journal. He said, our greatest protection isn't in keeping secrets, but in sharing them wisely. When enough people carry a piece of the truth, no one can erase it completely. The Shadow Riders launched their response the next day. Professional teams began systematic surveillance of every martial arts school in the valley. Students were photographed, instructors followed, training sessions monitored, but each attempt to intimidate only revealed more of their true nature. Every school they pressured had its own historical records, its own piece of the larger puzzle. The very techniques they were trying to control contained encoded knowledge about resisting exactly this kind of oppression. They still don't understand, Anna told the resistance leaders. They think martial arts is about physical technique, about fighting skill. They've never grasped that these arts survived because they're about something bigger, about protecting those who can't protect themselves. The scope of their conflict had expanded beyond a local battle. They were part of an ancient tradition of resistance against oppression, a network of protection that had operated quietly for generations. Inside Marie's diner's secured back room, the resistance leaders faced their hardest decision yet. Master Chen Wei had brought them irrefutable evidence. The Shadow Riders were preparing to move against every martial arts school in the valley simultaneously. They're bringing in more than just fighters, he explained, spreading surveillance photos across the table. military contractors, intelligence operatives, people trained to break resistance movements. They plan to take control of every training hall, every historical site, within 24 hours. Anna studied the tactical plans with growing concern. We can protect the schools, but it would mean revealing how much we really know. Once we show our hand, everything our ancestors worked to hide would be exposed, Isabella finished, joining them via secure video link from Thornhaven. Linda Hayes brought more complications. Just got word they're not just targeting schools, they've got lists of every student, every family member, everyone connected to traditional martial arts in the valley. The weight of generational responsibility pressed down on them. Centuries of carefully preserved knowledge, of protected roots and sacred traditions, all hanging in the balance. "We have another problem," Sarah Matthews added, arriving with fresh intelligence. "Remember those government contracts we found? Just identified some of the players, defense departments, intelligence agencies. If we expose the Shadow Riders, we risk revealing connections that powerful people want kept hidden." Michael Chen's expression was grim. "They're forcing our hand. Either we let them take control of the schools, or we risk everything our ancestors worked to protect," Isabella finished. The discussion continued late into the night. Each option carried heavy costs: preserve secrecy and lose the schools, or fight back and risk exposing ancient secrets. To modern scrutiny, Master Chen Wei watched the debate with knowing eyes. "Your ancestors faced similar choices," he told them. "Each generation must decide what's worth preserving and what price they're willing to pay to protect it." At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella stood in her family's training hall, surrounded by centuries of martial arts history. Her hand rested on her unborn child as she studied the ancestral weapons, the training manuals, the physical legacy of generations of protectors. "My great-grandfather wrote about choice," she told them through the video link. "He said the true test of a martial artist isn't in choosing between good and evil, but in choosing between different kinds of good, between different ways of protecting what matters." The Shadow Riders weren't waiting for them to decide. Reports came in of more professional fighters arriving, of surveillance equipment being positioned around schools, of preparations for coordinated action. "We need to decide now," Linda warned. "Once they start moving." Anna stood, her decision made. "Our ancestors didn't preserve these arts by hiding. They preserved them by passing them on, by teaching others to recognize what's worth protecting. The true secret isn't in the roots or the techniques, it's in the spirit of protection itself." "But the network," Michael cautioned, "the escape routes, the safe houses, will mean nothing if we let them destroy the communities that maintain them," Isabella replied. "A route is just a path until there are people willing to help others follow it." Master Chen Wei nodded approvingly. "Now you understand. The greatest wisdom isn't in knowing when to keep secrets, but in knowing when to share them." Their decision crystallized into action. Sarah began preparing documents for publication, not everything, but enough to expose the Shadow Riders' true nature while preserving the most crucial secrets. Linda coordinated with trusted officers, preparing to protect key locations. Michael and Anna began activating their network of schools and students, each prepared to defend their traditions. At Thornhaven, Isabella made her own preparations. "My great-grandfather had a saying," she told them. "The strongest guard isn't the one who never falls, but the one who chooses to stand back up, knowing the cost." Through the night, the Valley's martial arts community came alive with purpose. Students contacted students, teachers reached out. To teachers, ancient networks of communication and support reactivating. "They think they can break us by threatening everything at once," Anna observed, watching the preparations unfold. Instead, they've given us the reason to stand together openly for the first time in generations. The Shadow Riders would strike at dawn. But as the sun set over Cedar Grove, the resistance had found its truest strength, not in secrecy or combat skill, but in the choice to stand together, to protect not just techniques or routes, but the very spirit of martial arts itself. Dawn painted the valley gold as the Shadow Riders made their move. Black vehicles converged on every martial arts school simultaneously, their professional operators moving with military precision. But this time, they found something unexpected. At the Cedar Grove Traditional Arts Center, students of all ages stood in formation outside their school, performing synchronized forms. Parents and community members formed a circle around them, cameras recording every move. The Shadow Riders' tactical teams found themselves facing not resistance, but witnesses, dozens of phones live streaming their every action. "This is a private training session," the head instructor announced calmly, her voice carrying across the morning air. "You're welcome to watch, but any interference will be broadcast live to every major news outlet." Similar scenes played out across the valley. Each school had transformed its defense into a public demonstration, making it impossible for the Shadow Riders to act without exposure. At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella faced a more direct confrontation. James Blackwood arrived personally, flanked by his most elite operators. "This ends today," he announced, striding toward the training hall. "Your little community demonstration won't stop what's coming." Isabella stood on her front steps, 7 months pregnant, but radiating the calm confidence of a champion. "You're right about one thing," she replied. "This does end today, but not the way you think." As if on cue, vehicles appeared on every road leading to Thornhaven. Not just local martial artists, but representatives from schools across the country, masters of various styles, each carrying documents and evidence of the Shadow Riders' attempts to corrupt traditional arts in their own regions. "You're not just facing one community," Anna's voice came from behind Blackwood. She emerged from the morning mist, Master Chen Wei at her side. "You're facing all of us. Every school, every style, every tradition you've tried to corrupt." Sarah Matthews' expose went live simultaneously across multiple platforms. The article detailed the Shadow Riders' true nature, their connections to private military companies, their use of fight promotions as cover for darker operations, their systematic attempts to control traditional martial arts communities worldwide. "Impossible," Blackwood snarled, checking his phone as the story spread. "We controlled all the channels." "You controlled official channels," Michael corrected, emerging with Linda Hayes and a team of federal agents. "But traditional martial arts have always maintained their own networks of communication, ones you never managed to infiltrate." The Shadow Riders' response was immediate and violent. Professional teams attempted to breach multiple schools simultaneously, only to find each location prepared. Years of training, of practicing forms and techniques, transformed into practical defense. At the Cedar Grove Community Center, young students demonstrated why their arts had survived centuries of attempts at suppression. When armed operators attempted to enter through the back, they found themselves facing parents who'd spent years training alongside their children. "They're not just fighting us," Anna observed, watching the community's coordination. "They're fighting generations of preserved knowledge, of practiced resistance." The Valley's martial arts schools demonstrated why their traditions had endured. Each location became a center of organized defense, not through violence, but through disciplined, coordinated action that made aggression impossible without consequences. Isabella stood her ground at Thornhaven as Blackwood's operators took up tactical positions. "Last chance," he warned. "There are ways this can go that can't be undone." "You still don't understand what you're really facing," Isabella replied. one hand protectively over her child, the other maintaining perfect stance. These arts weren't preserved through force. They were preserved through something stronger, the will to protect what matters, no matter the cost. The Shadow Riders' coordinated assault faltered as their own organization began fracturing. Professional fighters, learning the truth about their employers, began standing down. Security contractors, faced with clear evidence of illegal operations, withdrew rather than risk exposure. Linda's federal backup arrived in force, armed with warrants based on Sarah's evidence. The Shadow Riders found themselves caught between legal authorities and a united martial arts community that had chosen this moment to stand openly together. "Your choice," Anna told Blackwood as his options dwindled. "Face justice through proper channels, or become the example we use to teach future generations why these arts are still necessary." The morning's confrontation became something unprecedented, not just a battle between criminals and community, but a demonstration of why traditional martial arts had survived countless attempts at control. Each school, each student, each master showed that true strength came not from force or fear, but from the unified will to protect what mattered. As the sun rose fully over Cedar Grove, the Shadow Riders' carefully constructed operation crumbled in the face of something they'd never truly understood: the power of traditional arts to unite people in defense of principles greater than themselves. Inside the Shadow Riders' crumbling operation, James Blackwood received an urgent message from his superiors. "Clean this up," the encrypted order read. "Use the prototype program. Full authorization." What emerged from their compound wasn't just fighters or security contractors, but something new. Teams equipped with advanced surveillance technology, movement analysis software, and combat enhancement systems began deploying throughout the valley. "They're trying to decode our techniques electronically," Michael reported, monitoring their signals. "Using AI to analyze traditional forms, trying to extract the hidden roots and meanings automatically." But the martial arts community's response demonstrated why their arts had survived centuries of evolution. At the Cedar Grove Traditional Arts Center, students began performing modified forms, each movement maintaining its defensive effectiveness while conveying different encoded information. "Our ancestors adapted these arts through every technological change in history," Anna reminded them. "From swords to guns, from horses to cars. We adapt, we evolve, but we never lose our core purpose." Isabella, watching from Thornhaven's security feeds, recognized the pattern. They think technology can unlock our secrets. They don't understand that the real knowledge isn't in the movements themselves, but in how we choose to use them. The Shadow Riders' advanced teams found their technology confounded by simple innovations. When their movement analysis software tried to decode traditional forms, it encountered students practicing variations that maintained combat effectiveness while changing the underlying patterns. Sarah Matthews documented each adaptation, building a record of how traditional arts could survive in a modern world. "Look at this," she showed Anna, displaying footage from different schools. Each group has found its own way to preserve the essential knowledge while making the surface unreadable to artificial analysis. At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella demonstrated why pregnancy hadn't diminished her effectiveness. When Shadow Rider operators attempted to scan her training sessions, they recorded only therapeutic exercise routines, while the real training continued in ways their technology couldn't detect. "My great-grandmother wrote about this," she told her students through secure channels. She said true martial arts aren't just about the techniques, but about understanding when to show strength and when to show nothing at all. The community's innovative responses spread through traditional networks. Schools shared new training methods that preserved their ancient knowledge while appearing ordinary to electronic surveillance. Students learned to practice in ways that maintained their art's effectiveness while confusing automated analysis. Linda Hayes coordinated with federal technical experts, amazed at the community's adaptability. "They're not just preserving old knowledge," she observed. "They're creating new ways to protect it, using the very technology meant to expose them." Master Chen Wei watched the adaptations with approval. "This is how traditional arts have always survived," he told Anna, "not by remaining static, but by growing stronger through each challenge. The Shadow Riders think technology gives them power over us. Instead, it's teaching us new ways to preserve what matters." The Shadow Riders' frustration manifested in escalating technological deployment. They brought in more advanced systems, more sophisticated analysis tools, but each new attempt to crack the traditional arts codes met innovative resistance. "They're scanning for hidden messages in our movements," Michael reported, monitoring their efforts. "So we're teaching our students to move in ways that tell false stories while preserving the true ones." At Marie's diner, the back room became a center for developing new protective measures. Traditional masters worked alongside tech-savvy students, finding ways to blend ancient wisdom with modern innovation. "The real strength of our arts isn't in keeping secrets," Anna told the gathered innovators. "It's in passing them on in ways that can survive any attempt to control them." The Valley's martial arts schools demonstrated why their traditions had endured through centuries of change. Each location became a center of adaptation, where ancient techniques evolved to meet modern challenges without losing their essential truth. Isabella, coordinating from Thornhaven, saw the bigger picture emerging. "Every time they try to use technology against us, we don't just resist, we grow stronger. We learn new ways to protect what matters, new ways to pass on what's important." Nay, the Shadow Riders' sophisticated operation found itself confronting something their technology couldn't quantify: the living, adapting spirit of traditional martial arts. Each attempt to analyze and control these arts only proved why they had survived so long. "They're learning what every threat to traditional arts eventually learns," Master Chen Wei observed, watching another Shadow Rider technical team withdraw in frustration. "True strength isn't in the techniques themselves, but in the wisdom to know how to preserve them." The Shadow Rider's frustration reached breaking point. James Blackwood received his final ultimatum from above. "End this tonight, or we'll send someone to end it for you." But as their forces mobilized for one massive offensive, the Valley's martial arts community demonstrated why unity was their greatest strength. At precisely 9 p.m., every traditional school in the region began their coordinated response. The Cedar Grove Community Center transformed into a command hub, where Linda Hayes worked alongside martial arts instructors to track Shadow Rider movements. "They're deploying in force," she reported. 3 main groups, professional operators with full tactical gear. "Perfect," Anna replied from her position. "Everything's ready." What unfolded wasn't just resistance. It was a masterpiece of coordinated action, generations of martial arts wisdom applied to modern defense. Each school had its role. Each student knew their part, and together they created something the Shadow Riders couldn't counter. At the traditional arts center, young students performed synchronized forms in the parking lot, their movements deliberately drawing attention. When Shadow Rider teams moved to investigate, they found themselves surrounded by parents and community members emerging from carefully prepared positions. "Remember," the head instructor called out, her voice carrying in the night air, "we're not here to fight. We're here to show them what real strength looks like." Isabella coordinated from Thornhaven, using her competition experience to direct the community's movements. Despite being 7 months pregnant, her tactical mind remained sharp as ever. "They think they're facing scattered schools," she observed. "They don't realize they're facing one unified community." Sarah Matthews broadcast everything live, ensuring every Shadow Rider action had witnesses. "They can't use their usual tactics," she reported, "not with the whole world watching." The Valley's martial arts schools demonstrated their true power not through combat, but through perfect coordination. When Shadow Rider teams approached one location, they found students and teachers already relocating to another, moving through the community in patterns that seemed random but formed. Part of a larger strategy. "This is what our ancestors prepared us for," Master Chen Wei told the gathered instructors. "Not just to defend ourselves, but to protect something larger, the very spirit of martial arts itself." Michael's technical team monitored Shadow Rider communications, hearing their growing frustration. "They can't predict our movements," he reported. "Every time they think they have us cornered, they find themselves facing empty buildings while we operate elsewhere." The community's unity manifested in unexpected ways. Local businesses opened their doors, providing safe spaces for students to continue their practices. Neighbors who'd never trained in martial arts formed communication networks, passing messages through channels the Shadow Riders couldn't monitor. "Look at what they've created," Anna observed proudly. "Not just martial artists defending schools, but an entire community remembering its strength." At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella faced Blackwood's final push. His elite teams approached from multiple directions, expecting to find a vulnerable target. Instead, they found representatives from every school in the valley, each demonstrating their art's unique contribution to their shared defense. "You still don't understand what you're really fighting," Isabella told him through their security system. "These aren't just separate schools you can intimidate one by one. This is one community, one tradition, standing together." The Shadow Riders' coordinated assault faltered as they encountered something their tactical training hadn't prepared them for. A community that moved as one, where each action supported every other, where traditional wisdom combined with modern unity to create an impenetrable defense. Linda's federal backup arrived to find the situation already contained. The Shadow Riders teams were effectively neutralized not through violence, but through the coordinated action of an entire community that had rediscovered its collective strength. "This is why these arts survive centuries," Master Chen Wei explained to the gathered observers. "Not because they teach the best fighting techniques, but because they teach people how to stand together, how to combine their strengths in defense of what matters." As midnight approached, the valley demonstrated why martial arts communities had endured through every challenge in history. Each school, each student, each supporter played their part in a coordinated response that transformed individual arts into one unified expression of community power. The Shadow Riders' operation collapsed not through defeat in combat, but through the realization that they faced something their force couldn't overcome. The unified spirit of traditional martial arts expressed through an entire community's coordinated action. Inside Marie's diner, now serving as their command center, the resistance leaders assessed the true cost of their stand. Linda Hayes spread out reports from across the valley, each detailing different aspects of their community's transformation. 6 schools suffered significant damage, she reported. The traditional arts center's historical archives were partially destroyed. 3 instructors are in the hospital, none critical, but all bearing the marks of standing their ground. But alongside the costs, other changes emerged. Sarah Matthews arrived with a different kind of report. "Look at these," she said, spreading photographs across the table. Students who'd never spoken in class were now leading younger ones in practice. Parents who'd watched from the sidelines for years had stepped forward to help defend their schools. "It's not just about what we lost," Anna observed. "It's about what we found." At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella received visitors bringing both damage reports and unexpected gifts. A local carpenter arrived to repair the training hall's damaged Doors refusing payment. My grandfather trained here, he explained. Never thought I'd have a chance to repay that debt. Master Chen Wei watched these developments with knowing eyes. This is how traditional arts truly grow stronger, he told them. Not through victory in combat, but through the bonds forged in standing together. The Shadow Riders operation had left visible scars throughout the valley. Windows boarded up at the Cedar Grove Community Center, equipment destroyed at smaller dojos, training grounds bearing the marks of confrontation. But each site of damage had become something else. A point of pride, a symbol of resistance, a reminder of what ordinary people could achieve when they stood together. Linda brought more reports showing deeper changes. Look at these numbers, she indicated police statistics. Crime down 40% in areas where martial arts schools started community watch programs. Domestic violence calls dropped wherever we opened. Women's self-defense classes. Sarah's investigation revealed another layer of transformation. It's not just about physical defense anymore, she explained, showing them community surveys. People are rediscovering what these arts were always meant to be, ways of building stronger communities, of preserving values worth protecting. At the hospitals where injured instructors recovered, something remarkable was happening. Their rooms had become impromptu dojos, with students continuing their training in hallways and waiting areas. The very act of carrying on, of refusing to let injury stop the transmission of their arts, inspired others to join. My great-grandfather wrote about this, Isabella told them during their evening meeting. He said the true measure of martial arts isn't in how many victories you win, but in how many people you inspire to find their own strength. The community's transformation manifested in unexpected ways. Local businesses that had stayed neutral during the conflict now displayed martial arts school logos in their windows. Teenagers who'd been at risk of joining gangs were instead joining training programs. The very fabric of society was being rewoven around cores of traditional wisdom. They thought they could break us by attacking our schools, Anna observed, watching students practice in the diner's parking lot. Instead, they helped us remember why these arts were created in the first place. Michael's technical team discovered something else in the aftermath. The Shadow Riders' sophisticated surveillance had inadvertently documented hundreds of examples of community courage. Ordinary people standing up against intimidation, students protecting each other, parents and children training side by side. We're not just preserving techniques anymore, Master Chen Wei noted, reviewing the footage. We're showing future generations what it means to stand for something larger than yourself. The physical costs were real. Broken windows could be repaired, but some historical documents were lost forever. Yet even these losses served a purpose, teaching new lessons about what was truly worth protecting. Linda's deputies reported another kind of change. People were walking taller in the streets, looking out for each other more, reporting crimes instead of staying silent. The martial arts community's stand had awakened something in the broader population, a remembrance that courage was contagious. This is the real victory, Isabella told them, one hand resting on her unborn child. Not that we stopped them, but that we showed everyone what's possible when people remember their strength. As evening fell over Cedar Grove, the true impact of their resistance became clear. They hadn't just defended schools or preserved techniques. They demonstrated why martial arts had survived centuries of attempts at suppression. Each cost borne, each sacrifice made, had helped forge a stronger community. The morning headlines broke like thunderclaps across the nation. Sarah Matthews' comprehensive exposé hit every major news outlet simultaneously. Shadow Riders exposed, international. Criminal networks attempt to control, traditional martial arts revealed. But it wasn't just Sarah's reporting that made the impact. Every student, every parent, every community member who'd stood against intimidation had documented their experiences. Hundreds of videos, thousands of photographs, countless personal testimonies created an undeniable record of truth. At the Shadow Riders compound, James Blackwood watched his empire crumble in real time. Federal agents swarmed the property, armed with warrants based on evidence that had been gathering for months. His phone rang constantly. Former allies distancing themselves, corrupt officials refusing his calls, superior officers going dark. "It's over," Linda Hayes told him as she personally clicked handcuffs around his wrists. "Your organization's exposure goes way beyond Cedar Grove now." The truth cascaded through official channels. State investigators uncovered networks of corrupted officials. Federal agents traced financial connections to international criminal enterprises. What had started as one community's stand for its martial arts traditions had exposed something far larger. At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella watched the morning news with quiet satisfaction. "My great-grandfather wrote that truth doesn't need force to prevail," she told Anna. "It just needs people brave enough to stand by it." The martial arts community's victory manifested in unexpected ways. Schools that had been threatened with closure now received official recognition as cultural heritage sites. Training programs that had operated in shadows gained legitimate status as educational institutions. "Look at this," Sarah showed them her latest findings. Similar communities worldwide are standing up, exposing Shadow Rider operations in their regions. What started here has become a global awakening. Master Chen Wei received reports from international martial arts federations. Traditional schools in 12 countries have already come forward, he announced, each sharing their own experiences of resistance, their own victories over intimidation. The Shadow Riders' attempt to control martial arts had backfired spectacularly. Instead of suppressing traditional schools, they'd inspired a renaissance. Communities that had forgotten their martial arts heritage began researching their past. Young people who dismissed traditional training as outdated now saw its relevance to modern challenges. Linda's investigation revealed deeper impacts. "Every time we arrest one of their operators," she reported, "more people come forward. Witnesses who were afraid to speak, victims who thought they were alone. The truth isn't just exposing crimes, it's healing communities." At the Cedar Grove Community Center, Anna watched students practice with renewed purpose. "They're not just learning techniques anymore," she observed. "They're learning what it means to stand for something, to be part of a tradition that refuses to bow to intimidation." The justice system moved with unprecedented speed, driven by overwhelming evidence and public attention. Corrupt officials faced exposure. Criminal networks found their operations compromised. The very power structures that had protected organizations like the Shadow Riders began to crack. Michael's technical team discovered something remarkable in the Shadow Riders' own files. They documented everything, he reported, showing them recovered data. Every threat, every act of corruption, every attempt at control. They were so confident in their power, they never thought these records would see light. But the most powerful truth emerged from the community itself. People began sharing stories of how martial arts had changed their lives. A teenager spoke about finding direction instead of joining gangs. A domestic violence survivor told how training gave her courage to leave her abuser. An elderly master described teaching children to stand against bullying. "This is why these arts survived centuries of attempts at control," Master Chen Wei explained to a gathered crowd. "Not just because they teach effective techniques, but because they preserve essential truths about human dignity and courage." Isabella, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, received visitors from martial arts schools across the country. Each came to learn how one community had stood against corruption and won. "The truth was always there," she told them. "In every form we practice, every technique we preserve. These arts teach us that real strength comes from standing together. The Shadow Riders International Network continued to unravel. Each exposed operation led to more revelations. Traditional martial arts communities worldwide began sharing information, creating networks of mutual support that would prevent future attempts at control. They never understood what they were really fighting, Anna told her students. They thought martial arts was about physical technique, about fighting skill. They never grasped that these arts preserve something more precious, the truth that ordinary people standing together can defeat any attempt at oppression. As federal agents continued their systematic dismantling of Shadow Rider operations, the Valley's martial arts community focused on rebuilding. But they weren't just repairing damaged schools. They were building something stronger. Each school, each training hall, became a center for preserving and sharing the truth about why martial arts endure. The Cedar Grove Community Center hummed with energy as hundreds gathered for what they called the Festival of Unity. 1 month after the Shadow Riders' defeat, the Valley's martial arts community had organized something unprecedented, a celebration that combined traditional demonstrations with testimonies of resistance and triumph. In the main hall, students from different schools performed synchronized forms, each movement telling part of their story. Young children who'd stood brave during the conflict demonstrated basic techniques alongside elderly masters who'd preserved their arts through decades of challenges. The performance spoke not just of martial skill, but of unbroken spirit. Isabella, now nearing her due date, watched from a seat of honor. "This isn't just about celebrating victory," she told the gathered crowd. "It's about remembering why we fought, why these arts matter enough to protect." The festival revealed how deeply the community had transformed. Local businesses that had once feared the Shadow Riders now proudly sponsored martial arts programs. Parents who'd watched from the sidelines now trained alongside their children. The very fabric of society had rewoven itself around cores of traditional wisdom and shared courage. "Look at what they've created," Sarah Matthews observed, documenting the celebration. Former rivals now taught joint classes. Schools that had once guarded their techniques jealously now shared knowledge openly, understanding that unity was their greatest strength. Linda Hayes brought news that added to the celebration. Federal prosecutors have secured convictions for the entire Shadow Rider leadership, she announced. But more importantly, look at these statistics. Crime rates had plummeted. Community engagement had soared. The martial arts school's stand had inspired broader social transformation. At Thornhaven Estate's display, Isabella's family history became a testament to endurance. "My great-grandfather preserved these arts through similar challenges," she explained to visitors, showing restored training manuals and weapons. "Each generation faces its own tests, but the core truth remains. These arts survive because they teach something essential about human dignity." Master Chenwei moved through the festival, watching with approval as different schools demonstrated their unique contributions to the community's victory. "This is how traditional arts truly flourish," he told Anna. "Not through isolation, but through sharing their strength, through showing others why they endure." The celebration included unexpected elements. Local theater groups performed dramatizations of key moments in the resistance. Children's art displayed their perspective on the conflict, not focusing on violence, but on community courage and unity. The festival had become more than a martial arts demonstration. It was a celebration of collective spirit. Michael's technical team had created a multimedia presentation showing how traditional wisdom had overcome modern threats. "They thought technology could break us," he explained to visitors. "Instead, it helped us share our story with the world. The festival's most powerful moments came from personal testimonies. A teenage student described finding courage to stand against bullies. A business owner told how the martial arts community's example inspired him to resist intimidation. A teacher explained how traditional training helped her students face modern challenges. "This is the real victory," Anna told the gathered crowd. "Not that we defeated one organization, but that we showed everyone what's possible when people remember their strength and stand together." The celebration spread beyond the community center. Throughout Cedar Grove, businesses hosted martial arts demonstrations in their spaces. Streets became temporary training grounds. The entire town had transformed into a living testament to the power of unified resistance. Marie's Diner, which had served as their command center during the conflict, now hosted a special exhibition. Photos and documents told the story of how ordinary people had stood against extraordinary threats. "This isn't just history," Marie told visitors. "It's a reminder that every community has this strength if they choose to use it." Isabella's advanced pregnancy didn't prevent her from participating. She demonstrated modified techniques that showed how martial arts could adapt to any circumstance. "These arts survived because they teach more than fighting," she explained. "They teach us how to overcome any challenge, how to find strength in any situation." The festival culminated in a grand demonstration where every school performed together, their different styles blending into one powerful expression of community spirit. Students who'd begun training just months ago moved alongside masters with decades of experience, each contributing to a display of unified purpose. "Look at what they've built," Master Chen Wei observed proudly. "Not just a defense against threats, but a new way of preserving and sharing traditional wisdom. This is how martial arts will survive into the future, not through fear of enemies, but through the joy of sharing strength." 1 year after the Shadow Riders' defeat, Cedar Grove had become something unexpected, a model for communities worldwide. The town that had broken an international criminal organization now demonstrated how traditional martial arts could transform modern society. At Thornhaven Estate, Isabella Thorne practiced gentle forms in the morning sun, her 3-month-old daughter watching from a secure carrier. The historic training hall had evolved into something more, a living museum where the past informed the future. "They come from everywhere now," Isabella told Anna during her regular visit. "People wanting to understand not just how we fought back, but how we built something stronger in the aftermath." The valley's transformation had exceeded anyone's expectations. Every martial arts school now operated at full capacity with waiting lists for new students. But they weren't just teaching fighting techniques. They were preserving and sharing the deeper wisdom that had helped them triumph. Sarah Matthews' final report had become required reading in journalism schools and law enforcement academies. The story wasn't just about exposing corruption, she explained during a university lecture. It was about showing how traditional values can overcome modern threats. Linda Hayes's reformed police department set new standards for community engagement. Officers trained alongside martial arts students, learning not just self-defense, but the principles of protecting with wisdom rather than force. "Start with respect," she advised visiting officials. "Build trust through understanding. Remember who we're really serving and why." The impact reached far beyond Cedar Grove. Michael's technical team had developed new ways to preserve traditional knowledge while sharing it securely. "We're not just protecting old secrets anymore," he explained to a group of visiting instructors. "We're showing how ancient wisdom can adapt to modern challenges." Master Chen Wei, who had remained to help guide the community's growth, observed these changes with satisfaction. "The Shadow Riders thought they could control martial arts by force," he told a gathering of students. "They never understood that true strength grows through sharing, not suppression." The community's transformation manifested in unexpected ways. Local businesses flourished as the town became known for its unique blend of traditional values and modern innovation. Crime rates remained at historic lows. Young people who might have drifted into trouble instead found purpose in training halls that taught more than just fighting. "My great-grandfather wrote about this possibility," Isabella shared, reading from newly discovered journals. "He said martial arts could either become mere sport or they could help build stronger communities. The choice would depend on each generation's understanding of what's truly worth preserving." At the Cedar Grove Community Center, Anna watched a new generation of students practice. Children who had witnessed their communities stand, now trained with purpose beyond mere self-defense. They were learning to be protectors, to stand for principles, to build something larger than themselves. "That's the real legacy," she told visiting martial artists. "Not that we stopped one threat, but that we showed everyone what's possible when people remember their true strength." The Shadow Riders' attempt to control traditional martial arts had backfired completely. Instead of suppressing these arts, they had sparked a renaissance. Communities worldwide studied Cedar Grove's example, learning how to preserve their own traditions while building stronger futures. "We're not just teaching techniques anymore," Master Chen Wei explained to an international gathering. "We're showing how traditional wisdom can help people face any challenge, how ancient principles can solve modern problems." Isabella's daughter, born amidst the aftermath of their victory, represented something powerful, the continuation of traditions that grew stronger through adversity. "She'll learn these arts," Isabella told her friends, watching her child grasp a toy wooden sword, not just for self-defense, but to understand what it means to protect something valuable. The final transformation came in how the community viewed itself. They weren't just a collection of martial arts schools anymore. They were living proof that ordinary people standing together could overcome any attempt at oppression. "That's what these arts were always meant to teach," Anna told her students. During a sunset training session, not just how to fight, but how to live with courage, how to stand for what's right, how to build something worth protecting. As the sun set over Cedar Grove, the evening air filled with the sounds of training from multiple schools. Each punch, each kick, each form practiced carried forward a legacy strengthened by resistance. The Shadow Riders had wanted to control martial arts through force. Instead, they had helped demonstrate why these arts would always endure. "My great-grandfather ended his journals with a prediction," Isabella shared during their final gathering. "He said the true test of martial arts wouldn't be in combat, but in how they helped people build better communities, better futures." Looking at what we've created here, I'd say we've proven him right. The story of Cedar Grove's resistance became more than just a tale of victory over corruption. It became a testament to the enduring power of traditional wisdom, to the strength found in unity, and to the truth that some things, once awakened, can never be suppressed again. For in the end, the greatest victory wasn't in defeating an enemy, but in showing the world that ordinary people, armed with tradition and united in purpose, could build something stronger than any force sent against them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.